Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. When I had this realization and I thought about this one yesterday, I got excited because it's something that I'd sussed out in a vague, sort of angry, defensive way decades ago in relationship to my parents, but I also continued to struggle with the feeling or the idea that if I was a stronger person or a more assertive person or had better boundaries, that I wouldn't have suffered from the thing. So I'm going to describe this. I'm going to describe one specific component of it, but this applies in a much larger, broader scale with parents or family systems or social systems, any system in which someone is targeted, victimized, and then scapegoated, blamed, manipulated to reverse, Darvo, deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender. If you haven't heard that, it's a big narcissistic move. Right? If you bring something up with a narcissist, you're like, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with what you did in X, Y, or Z. I'm not sure what you intended. And they'll immediately be like, well, I didn't do that. I didn't say that. What are you talking about? Oh my God, you're so sensitive. I think you might have literally made that up. Okay. First deny, I didn't say that. I didn't do that. Next attack, turn it around on your character. And now I can't believe you're acting this way. I'm flabbergasted. Like, I don't even know. I don't feel comfortable doing stuff with you if you're just going to end up having these temper tantrums about stuff, right? Okay, now the narcissist just went, oh, I'm the victim of the fact that you're bringing this to me. So reversed victim and offender, Darvo. This is a more global version of that sort of loops in with gaslighting. So let me be specific. I'm going to call this episode something like micro monitoring versus micromanagement. And okay, these words are watered down versions of what I experienced with both a mother and a father, but especially a mother who was severely enmeshed with me, and micromanagement doesn't even really touch the level of control. She literally imposed her will and her meaning on what I thought or what I experienced. And she would even tell me, you don't feel that way. And then she would tell me how I felt. So it was extreme. My dad was more micromanagement. He was extremely perfectionistic and narcissistic, and he didn't care what I thought or felt, and he didn't give a rat's ass. If I had a feeling about what he was saying, it merely had to be done the way he said. And if it wasn't done that way, you were stupid and you were doing it the wrong way. Right? So, but let's go ahead and call it micromanagement, right? I spent my entire childhood being micromanaged in some ways, and in other ways having no parenting at all. But here's the thing that's interesting. My parents let up hardcore around the time I was 14 or 15. And my oldest sister, who they had badly abused, moved out and had a pretty hard time, dated a guy who physically abused her. And I think my parents sort of like came to some sort of realization of like, hey, we're really fucking up. Or at the very least, if society saw how we were doing this, we would be judged for it. And they let up. And so then my younger brothers, one of my older sisters, they never managed. They never micromanaged. She was the all-good child. My younger brothers, though, grew up with a somewhat or pretty negligent parenting, were free to sort of explore what it is to have agency, to do what they choose to do, to go out for sports, to get rides to the places they needed to go, money to buy the things they needed to do what they needed to do. If they wanted to go skiing, they could go skiing. If they wanted to go with their buddies, they could go with their buddies, right? So they had all of these experiences of being an autonomous human being with agency. And it really bothered me that for years I continued to struggle in my parents' presence with the ability to intend, to choose, to have any kind of agency at all, unless it was like a little bit extreme and rebellious, like just leaving home and never coming back, or, you know, being a musician in a way in which I barely subsisted, barely. I spent years that sometimes I ate one meal a day, sometimes only two. I was painfully thin for a few years because I just didn't have food to eat. Right? And I was living in a country where there's money, there's food, there's jobs. But to come back to the point, the first 10, 12, 14 years of my life was intense micromanagement. We'll start with my dad's part, which was when I was 5, when I was 7, when I was 8, I was not even allowed to do things. If I picked something up to try something, a tool or whatever, my father almost, I don't want to say start shaking, but his whole body would become rigid. And he would stare intently. And then he would grab what was in my hand and yank it out of my hand and do it. And see, that's how you do it. And he would walk away with this air of satisfaction of like, oh, what an idiot. And this was a huge problem for him. But there was an intense focus on me, maybe because I was the oldest son or I was the first boy in the family. My mom tended to kind of parent my sisters more if there was any normal parenting. And it was always like, well, he's the boy, it's your job. And so I would sort of get fobbed off on my father. So there was this hyper intense. Another example I can think of, my mother, who was emotionally very disturbed since I was in elementary school, was absolutely convinced that I was going to be a drug addict. I've never had a problem with drugs. I have a very hard time with chemicals. I'm very sensitive to them. I never had a problem with drinking. Never, like I just physically can't handle it. I'm not a better person than somebody. Maybe I would have been, but I just physically can't handle it. It wasn't until I was in my late 30s and 40s that I could even have a cup of coffee in the morning, right? But she was just absolutely convinced that I was going to be a drug addict, to the point that when I was like in 4th or 5th grade, she gave me this horrible book about a drug addict meant for adults. I had a very high reading level. I read it and I was depressed for months. In fact, I think I was kind of depressed that entire year because the images in it and the content in it were so inappropriate. And it was a world and a reality that I had no understanding, right? It was this guy who was destroying himself and he dropped drugs in the toilet and reached in and pulled them out and took them in. It was very disturbing for me. So my mom's side was sort of like that kind of stuff, just this absolute conviction that, he's a drug addict. He's going to be a drug addict. And by the way, we're Seventh-day Adventists. Nobody in our realm did drugs at all, but except for my oldest sister, who came home hungover, drunk, did drugs her entire childhood, her entire high school, and my parents were oblivious to it, right? But me, I was absolutely the most innocent and had no desire to do and felt disturbed by the idea of doing, and my mother was absolutely convinced that I was a drug addict. So to come back to the micromanagement part, even at 12, I remember, I could just get up in the morning, and something that borderlines do, something that my mother did, is she would just ramp up to these heightened states for no reason that had anything to do with me or anyone else. And when she did, she needed a target. She needed to be angry about something and upset about something. And so sometimes my entire childhood, I would just get up and walk into the room, and already there would be this angry, paranoid sort of like look on their faces when they looked at me. It was just like, this kid, and I would have no idea what was happening. So that was, nothing had happened. I had not been in trouble. I had not done anything. And in fact, if you can hear from the level of micromanagement, I was unnaturally and intensely non-problematic. I even had a couple years that I had a perfect attendance record in high school, because I just, not only could I not break rules, but I was constantly being accused of breaking rules that didn't exist and that had never been broken. And my mother's level of paranoia meant that there was nothing you could say, nothing. She would harangue me for an hour about, you did this and you said this. And an example would be, I think once teachers sort of sussed out that something weird was going on in our house, they would try to give positive reinforcement. So they would call to say, hey, John did a good job. And the fact that they called, my mother would just use to be like, your teacher's called and, blah, 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 and I'm sure you're doing this or you're doing that. And she would just harangue for an hour over something that had never happened. But anyway, in this particular case, I was maybe 12. I think it was a freshman, so I was probably 12 or 13 years old, whatever it was. I got up and that the energy was already that in the room. And, my dad would glare at me angrily as if I had done something, which meant that my mother had been in his ear like, John is this and John, and you're going to have to get involved because if you don't, blah, 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 like we don't want him to end up being, she would literally talk this way and just ramp him up into a righteous rage. So I sort of walked into that energy and went to take a shower and got out of the shower. I forget what I was doing. I was brushing my teeth and that I took the cap off the mouthwash, and my dad used a screwdriver and like unlocked the door, flung the door open and pushed his way in. And we had a very small bathroom. It was a very humiliating, weird experience because I was naked, kind of with a towel wrapped around me. And he kind of shoved himself in between me and the counter and was like looking around. And he saw the mouthwash bottle and he picked it up and he grabbed the cap and he tightened it and said something about, I don't even know what the fuck he said, but he sort of played it off as if, you need to learn how to, do things in this house, and looked around the entire bathroom and then stomped out. Right. So remember I told you there's micromanagement, and then what my parents did was profoundly sick. So that's an example, right? The one kid who I smoked pot a couple times, which I hated. To this day, I cannot fucking stand pot. Hate. I've tried it a few times. I tried it when I was a musician, friends with, I fucking hate it. I hate it. I hate the experience, but can't stand it. But other than that, my brothers were drinking, having parties at the house. My oldest sister, Christine, would come home hungover and just say, throwing up and say, she caught the flu, whatever. All of this shit was going on, but supposedly I was this just verging on the edge of drug addiction, right? I was such an innocent, idealistic kid who had totally internalized, super hyper-idealized. The Seventh-day Adventists had this pamphlet called The Little Friend that they would give to the kids. Now, other kids, I'm sure, were like, whatever. They don't want to go to church. They don't give a shit. They just want to get out of church and go play or whatever. But I was a very intellectual, intelligent, sensitive kid who internalized all this shit. And the lessons in The Little Friend were so black and white, infantile level of morality, where it was always this story about, this child who told this truth and was being good, but was kind of being bullied or mistreated. And then this other child who was lying and stealing. And then ultimately there would be this catastrophic outcome for the child who was lying and stealing. And the child who was being good would have some healthy, wholesome outcome of being loved or accepted or getting a job, like whatever. It was so black and white. I don't think it helped anything, because that's not how the world works. Bad things happen to good people all the time, and good things happen to bad people all the time. Bad people are able to manipulate their way into having nice things all the time. That's not how morality works. But what was interesting is I internalized all that shit. I believed in Jesus. I believed in being like Jesus. And out of everyone in my family, I was absolutely the most concerned with ethics. That doesn't mean that I didn't do unethical things and terrible. I did. I'm a human. But I was the most concerned with it and the most hyper aware of being considerate of other people, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely no danger of ever becoming someone who drank regularly, which one of my brothers did. Thankfully, he tailed that off. Whatever. I was literally, and you don't know if that's why borderlines do what they do, but there was this targeting, right? I'll give you one more example. Once I matured enough to really dislike all the conflict and the bullying and the weirdness in our family, my next brother spent 2 or 3 years really bullying our youngest brother really, really badly. Would just follow him around the house, pick fights with him, call him names, whatever. And the same thing had happened to him. So like, I'm not trying to like throw anyone under the bus. I had bullied him really badly for a couple of years, and thank God he had fought back, and thank God my parents had intervened. But they didn't intervene when I was being bullied by my sister, and they did not intervene when that brother was bullying my youngest brother. But every time my youngest brother would cry or protest or whatever, my mother would holler from anywhere in the house, "John, you knock that off. You leave him," like for years. And that was also my entire childhood. My oldest sister had bullied me horribly. And anytime I defended myself, my mother was like, "Well, you're the one who started it. You're always the one who started it. You always ruin everything," right? So without going through all of the insanity of my childhood, I was micromanaged at just a brutal, really, really sick level in so many ways. Even like I remember like at 14 years old or whatever, getting in the car with the whole family and sneezing, and my mother going, "Are you constipated?" And it was her enmeshment, her sickness was like that deep. There was literally nothing I could do that wasn't instantly interpreted as something sick, psychologically sick, whatever, and always accusatory, never with any sense of empathy or kindness or care, right? So the micromanagement, and we lived on the side of a mountain, so there wasn't anyone else around to really see. So I lived with this intense micromanagement for the first 15, 20 years of my life. Once I got to be old enough to drive the other kids around, suddenly I was okay. So there was a lot of freedom for me, too much freedom for me, once I was like 16, 17. And then I left home at 19. The micromanagement didn't stop. There was tons of opinions and constant, maybe not constant, but anytime I was talked about, believe me, it was not nice. And then I would hear trickles of the messages come through my sister or comments that my brothers made. So this didn't end. There was just this absolute conviction that I was a sick drug addict, whatever. And that continued on forever. To a certain extent, never stopped. I'll give you an example. I have a certain amount of talent with language, though I haven't pursued it very well. I have a rudimentary level of Spanish. My wife speaks Spanish as her first language. We spoke it in our home with my daughter, who spoke Spanish before she spoke English, even though she grew up here, blah, blah, blah. So I can reel off 2 or 3 sentences in Spanish, reasonable Spanish, whatever. To this day, my sister goes, are you just making weird noises with your mouth? And she's serious, because the perception of me that my mother crafted was so sick and dysfunctional and incapable of doing anything, that even things that I have a real natural talent for, and always did. For example, I learned to read before my older sister did, because I was very talented. Like, even those things, my sister, who deeply internalized this very sick perception of me, to this day literally can't accept that I have like a rudimentary ability with a second language. And now I'm learning a third language. Like, and when I say things in that third language to sort of show off, it's the same comment. Like, are you just like making weird noises with your mouth? Now, when she's saying that, she's not dumb. She's saying that because part of the micromanagement was that my mother spent my entire my mother molested me, right? And then once she realized, oh, he's going to talk. Like, he talks. I have potty mouth around honest shit. That's why I'm a therapist. It's like I was talking when I was a kid going, why did you do that? Why are you doing this? Well, right? Once she realized, oh, he's going to talk, she went after building this perception of me as, okay, maybe talented, but this weird, hyper emotional person who lives in this reality that he sort of invents in his head. And she was constantly saying, oh, he fakes everything, or he makes things up. My entire childhood was my mother going, oh, John makes things up. He just makes up stories. He's always making up stories, right? This is a woman who molested me between about 5 and 8 and just didn't want anyone to believe me, and my brothers and sisters don't. Right, but this is all part of this micromanagement where my mother had an agenda. The intensity of the micromanagement and gaslighting was to create a perception of me such that my brothers and sisters would be unwilling to listen or unwilling to believe what she had done. Okay, but let's come to the point. I do enjoy sharing these things with you guys because I was silenced for a long time and I've gotten over the trauma of it. So I enjoy actually using it as content. But again, I ask that you be respectful. Most of these people are still alive. Here's the point. Micromanagement versus micromonitoring. There did come a point, not with my mom. She's remained sick and continues to push the same narrative. She's had to back off because I'm clearly successful, intelligent, stable. There comes a point where she just couldn't continue to play the game at the level of intensity that she did. But my dad worked really hard on himself and at some point realized this is not healthy and this is not right. Right? His ultra controlling behaviors. And so I'll just use him as an example. There did come a point where he was no longer micromanaging me. There did kind of come a point where my mother was no longer micromanaging me. She still micromanages the narrative in order to protect herself. And she was willing to destroy my relationship with my siblings to do it. That was not a problem for her. But the micromanagement stopped, and especially with my dad, it stopped. Now, what's the significance of this? My dad had a real problem. If you looked it up, DSM, he could definitely fits the definition of obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is a perfectionism that's just not about anxiety. It's a personality disorder because it's looped into, it involves belief systems and identity systems and extreme narcissism, such that it's not just that they're doing compulsive behaviors to manage their anxiety, which is what OCD is. These are people who have a severe problem with anxiety and they wash their hands 20 times in a row, whatever. They're doing these behaviors to manage their anxiety, and if you can help them heal their anxiety, the behaviors go away. With OCPD, the personality disorder, there's extreme narcissism looped in. So they're managing their anxiety, but they've looped in this narcissism that makes them believe in their perfectionism and believe that I'm right and what I'm saying is better. And so he was at a severe level, but at some point, and credit to him, right, that he was always kind of pushing himself and learning, he realized this is not right, like I shouldn't be doing this. But what's interesting is, let's say I was 25 or 30. The few times I came back home, if I were to do something in front of him, I'm going to model the behavior. When I was a child, when I picked something up, he would literally almost be spitting with frustration before I started, right? It would be like, he would do that. Like, I'm not exaggerating. I'm imitating very accurately what my father would do. If I picked something, I would be like, he would just like instant like rage or like what frustration, like, you're so stupid, you're going to do this wrong, right? He was communicating. He didn't often say things like that, but he would say things like that when I was younger. Like, you're an idiot. What do you think you're doing? Like, that's not how you do it. You grab it out of your hand and do it. See there, that's how you do it. And he would stomp away in frustration. But once he sort of moved on to what I'm calling micromonitoring, which I just sort of like at this huge realization of what abusive gaslighting parents and family systems and social systems do is, once they've set the hook, you know, like a bull, where they used to put a big ring in a bull's nose, pierce the bull's nose and then put a ring through there, because it's this big, powerful animal, but if you want to control him, you can grab that ring and it's painful, and he's going to learn to acquiesce to your demands because you can inflict pain. So many controlling, abusive parents set the ring by being abusive and controlling to a toxic, disgusting level for 5, 10, 15 years of their child's life. And then they'll back off. And you can give them credit. But the truth is, they've already set the ring on the victim. The truth is, my nervous system was so destroyed and so violently hyperreactive to my parents' control and to the pain and the shame and the control that they could inflict and the intense level of PTSD that could just crop up and the flooding of adrenaline and cortisol that would make it almost impossible for me to think. They had spent 15 years setting that in with pain, humiliation, molestation, pretending they were leaving me at the side of the freeway, whipping me until I was in a fetal position, like all of that shit, that once they backed off, it doesn't matter. They set the ring. And they didn't do it to my brothers. And they set the ring. And so what happens with these parents? I'm going to tell you, not everybody's going to agree with me, but I don't give a shit. What happens with these parents is they back off and they act like, well, maybe that was wrong, but we're not doing that anymore. But it doesn't fucking matter, because they still micro-monitor. And the micro-monitoring is the same as grabbing the ring in the bull's nose. The bull has learned there's intense pain associated with this, and I'm going to have to acquiesce to their demands. So I remained controlled by my mother's comments and how she directed the narrative around me. Even though in my early 30s I rebelled and had some pretty rageful conversations with my siblings, which went nowhere. Like, they just believe what they believe, end of story, because it's convenient for them. And in my dad, even into 25, 30, 35, even if he didn't, and he still sometimes had temper tantrums, right? If I worked with him, which I just stopped working with him. you would see this if I picked something up or started to do something. And you would see him like, he would walk away and leave the room because he was managing this intense and overwhelming need to control me and to respond with this criticism and judgment and a desire to take what I was doing and do it, right? I'll give you another, for example. In my late 20s, I visited home and we all decided to go whitewater rafting. It was on a river that most of it was class 1 or 2, like very, very mild. You could be anywhere on the river. It's this wide, rolling river that's sort of fun. There's parts that's a little bit faster, parts a little bit slower with a little bit of whoops, whatever. And he sort of directed, and I wanted to direct. And once I was directing, it's like, well, you could go on the rolly parts, you could go on the fast, but there's really nothing specific to be done, right? And even at 27 or 30, whenever that was, he was still like, why? And he would just, this rage of like, you're doing it wrong, right? I mean, complete insanity. And by that time, I had the sort of presence of mind to push back and to yell at him. So there were still those things, but mostly it was just this micromanagement. I knew that every time I moved, I was being watched. Everything I did, I was being judged and analyzed by my mother and by my father. And those kind of people will say they changed, but they didn't. And I want to make this statement to you. Someone who changes doesn't go, well, I probably shouldn't do that. Really, they're worried about what it looks like. And then kind of mitigates it by 70%. That's not somebody who changed. That's not somebody who gives a fuck about what you experience. That's not somebody who gives a fuck about what they did to you. Not once did either of my parents come to me and go, look, what we did to you was really, really sick. We micromanaged you. We hyper-controlled you. We criticized everything you did. And it probably had really negative. No, not once. All the years I struggled with intense anxiety, PTSD, was in therapy for 50. Not once did they ever fucking own that was a direct consequence of their shitty, sick-ass behavior. Not once. It would just be like, oh, well, if you, even though they never did help pay for therapy, I paid for all of it myself. It was like, well, they were willing to allow to use the idea of me having mental health issues as still fitting my mother's narrative that he's sick, he's this, he's blah, blah, blah. Not once did they ever own that it's like, oh, this is a direct consequence of what the things they did to me for 15 years. It's in the literature. It's not confusing. You don't molest a kid and do the things that my parents did and go, oh, well, his anxiety and PTSD is on him. He was just kind of like born that way. He's just really sensitive, right? Okay, so that's not change. Backing off by 70% is not change. Because change for those people, and this is what I see a lot of victims do, right? Whatever the version their abuse was, the abusers will slowly realize, oh, the world sees this differently than we do. And whether we think we're entitled to this or not, this is probably not a good thing to do. And they'll back off by 50, 70, 80%. But here's what happens for the victim. The victim is left doubly confused because they were already blamed for their response to the abuse their entire childhood. And they've internalized that. So they're struggling to go, oh, this isn't mine. And now the abusers have backed off by 80%. And when the victim talks about it in therapy or whatever, or talks about it to people in the family, whatever, the family's like, well, maybe it wasn't, but they're not that way anymore. Well, they have their own issues. Like, you can't expect them to blah, blah, blah. And as I usually want to say, and I'm going to say again, shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're full of shit. You're in denial. And you're trying to make it as nice as possible for the abusers because you don't want to deal with how horrible and disturbing and shitty the abuse was. And nothing changed. To the victims, I'm telling you right now, nothing changed. They backed off because they're worried about what it looks like. If they gave a fuck about what it did to you and their responsibility for what it did to you, A, they would own that they did it to you. We did these things and we see that there's a direct correlation, whether you want to be clinical about it or just be personal, like I did this to you and I can see that you struggle with it and you're having to go to therapy, but it's on me. I did it and I'm really sorry. That's number one. And number two, they would go to therapy and do whatever the fuck they need to do to heal that makes them compulsively abusive and hyper controlling. But instead, and this is what my parents did, they reduced the behaviors by 50, 70%, lie about the fact that they are the cause of all that damage to the victim, and then use that reduction to go, well, you know, I changed like it's not okay. We were maybe wrong about some of the stuff. Like, I don't totally disagree, but it's not like that anyway. And the other people are fine, right? This is something my dad would always say. Well, your brothers and sisters are fine. Well, yeah, because you didn't do it to them. You dumb fuck. Right? So they'll use this, and again, like I'm saying, you dumb fuck, because it's blindingly clear. This is we're not talking about gray area, right? My mother didn't molest anyone else in our family. She didn't force anyone else to strip naked as punishment. She didn't pretend that she was leaving my siblings at the side of the freeway, which she did twice with me, and twice people threatened to call the police. She didn't hyper micromanage anybody else other than my oldest sister, who had pretty severe mental health issues, and it was pretty destructive to her. Right? But they will play this game where the micromanagement, which is abuse, turns into micromonitoring. And you know you're still being watched. And they're still accessing the buttons. They're still looking at the ring in the bull's nose. And the bull knows the ring is there. And the bull knows it's been used multiple times to inflict pain. And the bull knows that that person is hyper aware that the ring is there and what it can do. And those people will pretend that they changed, but they didn't change a fucking thing. Nothing. They're lying. But they're lying in a way that society is so confused about the subtleties and the dynamics of these things, society will just be like, well, we don't know for sure that all of those things, there has to be some difference in perception, right? Really? Is there a difference in perception of being forced to strip totally naked? That's not that's not a confusing thing. Being stripped totally naked and not being allowed to put your hands over your privates. There's nothing confusing. You can be gray area about tone of voice, right? I imitate my mother and father's tone of voice. I know that I'm imitating accurately to what they were like the first 10 years of my life, and my brothers never heard that tone, so of course I get it's gray area for them. They don't know. They didn't experience that. But what abusive people will do, the micromanagers who become micromonitors, will act as if things that are stunningly black and white, they'll act as if it's gray area, and society will participate in this and act as if it's gray area. Well, maybe there is he was a sensitive kid and maybe he perceived it differently, and they'll do this mishmash of bullshit. And then they'll look at, right, my father reduced his behaviors by easily 80%. When I was a child, it was every time, and it was punitive and angry and judgmental, even for like as young as 5 years old. Right? Like one example is, my father didn't have the capability of relating to kids, so he simply didn't parent or interact, especially with me, because my mom was already putting a lot of disturbing messages about me into the family system. He didn't know what to do with it, but he didn't know what to do anyway. And my mom took my sisters out to do something. And I remember feeling so excited. I was like 4.5, 5 years old, so excited that I get to be in the room with my dad. And he was sitting there reading his paper. And so I crossed from the kitchen that had no carpet into the living room that had carpet. And as a 5-year-old, whatever, I kind of tripped on the edge of the carpet. And my dad dropped the newspaper and went, "Not very bright," and put the newspaper back up. That was that, right? So this was how sick he was as a human being. And in his defense, guys, he was like maybe 27 at that point. He had me, I think, at like 23 or 24 or something. He was a baby when he had kids. He got married at 17. He was a child, right? If you want to feel empathy for him. So that was the level when I was a child. Literally just a 5-year-old tripping on the carpet would result in this shitty, insulting retort from him. And he did that mostly with me, not with my sisters, and then not at all with my brothers. Maybe they might hear something once in a year, which is what they say. They're like, "Well, it's weird, Yeah, I mean, once in a great while, he could. Yeah, you dumb motherfuckers. You think that's the same as when I was 0 through 10? Pull your head out. How convenient for you to believe that." So the micromanagement becomes micromonitoring, and there's this significant reduction in behaviors, and all of society just sits there and buys the mishmash of turning black and white things into gray area things. And as I was making the point, it's like, well, tone of voice could be gray area. It can. I know what their tone of voice was. I know how they were. I'm very good at mimicry. And I was also very good at knowing later that it wasn't nearly as intense. So that's what my brothers perceive, right? But there are some things that are black and white. So what these abusers will do is they'll back off by 50, 60, 70, 80%. And then they'll play it off on, I had a terrible childhood. I know I was not the best parent. They'll say things like, "Oh, I know I was not the best parent. I tried my best," blah, blah. Okay, that's factually true for most people, unless they're an out-and-out sociopath, which my mother is. Very sociopathic, and easily could be diagnosed as a psychopath or a sociopath. So unless it's that, they do intend something, but they're lying. So now I'm speaking to the victims who are lost in the sea of society being totally full of shit and thinking they have any goddamn idea, right? Do you think anybody in my extended family has any idea who my parents are and were and the things that they did when I was... Nobody has any idea. Nobody in the community I grew up in has any idea, right? Society doesn't have it, and they're never going to, because they're just going to get a he said, she said, blah, blah, blah. My brothers are going to report what they think it was once they grew up and experienced my parents, whatever. They experienced my parents at the 80% reduction. So to you victims, I want you to understand that abuse and that micromanagement, very, very often, it's very rare that someone remains at the same level of virulent abuse and micromanagement. Your abusers reduce their behavior by 60 or 70 or 80%. But the ring has already been set in your nose. The ring has already been set in your nose. Consciously and subconsciously. And you know it. You struggle with it in therapy. You struggle with feeling shame that they have this level of control that they can just drop a comment or a look. And you know that you're still being micro-monitored. You're being micro-monitored. And you know that abuser is sitting there staring intently at the ring in your nose. And you know that the people they didn't do it to don't even know what it's like to have a ring in their nose. And to struggle with the shame and embarrassment that there is a ring in your nose. And to know that you can protest, but then the people in the situation will be like, oh my God, you're being so reactive. And maybe if you were calmer, maybe if you talked to mom and dad differently, blah, blah, blah. And society's going to agree with that. Victims, I'm talking mostly directly to you. The rest of you can listen, no problem. If you're someone who didn't experience those things, but you have some empathy, God love you, God bless you. For all the people who are full of shit, go fuck yourself. Because so many of us are telling the truth now and just saying it. And if you feel uncomfortable, go fuck yourself. That's your problem. Victims, they abused and micromanaged you, and then that became micromonitoring. And you can see them twitch and you can see them tense up. But they're not aware that they just feel anxious and they're dumping their anxiety. They're not aware of that. The personality disorders are not aware of that. The only thing they think is, this kid is so difficult. Okay, I'm managing my behavior, but they've been such a mess. It's so difficult to parent. I really love them. That they're telling themselves that lie in their head, completely erasing how badly they abused you. And it's a lie. And if they wanted to, they could fucking own it. They could. But they don't, because it works to go from micromanagement to micromonitoring, because it works to keep you buried in that energy that you had to internalize. And it keeps tweaking the ring in your nose. And yes, as an adult, you're responsible for recognizing that, getting away from them, setting boundaries, whatever you and your therapist or your friend or support system, however you handle it, you're responsible. It's deeply unjust, but they're not going to undo it. You're going to have to go through the pain of undoing the ring, getting it out of your nose, throwing it away, healing. Like, you're going to have to do that. There is no other way. But I'm here to tell you, I know personally and as a clinician, I know what they did to you. And they went from abuse, maybe severe abuse and severe micromanagement, to micromonitoring. And they pretend that was them taking responsibility. And if you still have problems with them, it's just that you really are actually a sensitive, hyper-reactive person. And then they're going to throw enough gray area into the extreme black and white abuse that you experienced and pretend that it didn't happen, so that they can continue to allow the scales to tip in favor of you're at least partially responsible, or maybe 2/3 responsible, for the fact that you have this kind of nervous system and you didn't take responsibility for it and you were a difficult child. And they're fucking lying. And all the people in that system are going to lie. My brothers and sisters are lying to themselves, right? They've never tried to ask or even explore what the possibility of any other reality was. Never even asked. Can't even have the conversation, right? Social systems, they're going to lie. They're going to lie. I know I bring up white America a lot, but I'm not going to stop fucking doing it, because it's my race and my culture and my society, and there is an ethical and moral rot that is weakening us. I'm not even pretending that I'm doing this as an ally. If I was an ally, I would have been bleeding in the streets trying to protect black people from the sickness of the society. So I'm not pretending I'm a good person. I'm just telling you, I'm not interested in fucking lying about what white society did to black society. Now, there have been things done. Maybe some backing off on, refusing to allow black people to purchase in nice neighborhoods and acing black people out of business opportunities. Okay, there's been some shift, and all white society has done is gone, see, like, we even change all these things and there's affirmative action, and you guys are still sitting there complaining. Hey, you psycho, shut the fuck up. We set the ring in their nose for 400 years and tweaked it and ripped it out and inflicted severe pain and suffering, and we still micro-monitor them. They are still micro-monitored by law enforcement and by punitive sick people and by racist-ass white people who get all twitchy. Okay, it's a park where mostly white people and a black family shows up. When black people tell you that they can feel that they're being watched, they are. Not by everyone, but there's one or two families that just keep side-eyeing and kind of they get all uncomfortable, and then they'll feel like, oh, I'm not racist. And then they'll just go approach that family. Hey, how are you folks doing? You doing good today? But it'll be this weird fucking energy where it's like, you didn't get up and go introduce yourself to any of the white families. You're doing that because you feel uncomfortable about your weird-ass fucking response to the fact that a black family showed up. You weirdo. And if things go a little weird and the black family's not receptive and it's like, hey, we just want our space, please leave us alone, then that white person is gonna be like, oh my God, like, no wonder. It's like, how are you supposed to like heal society? Like, man, shut the fuck up. They were abused, murdered, micromanaged, and now they're still being micro-monitored, and they fucking know it. And if you're a white person who pretends that it's not true, shut the fuck up. It's true. Get over it. Yeah, we weakened ourselves. We poisoned ourselves. We have allowed rot and corruption, moral rot, to set in at our very core. We who are a part of this society, this long Western tradition of attempting to build in human rights and, you know, whatever, and who started this country, who at least on paper at least was an advancement of human quality of life, completely reneged on it and allowed rot, moral rot in. And those people are still being micro-monitored, and they know it and they can feel it. And it comes after hundreds of years of micromanagement. So you don't get to go, well, we baked off by 80%. Shut the fuck up. That's some stupid, stupid shit. That is not how it works. You don't abuse people for decades, in their case, hundreds of years, fry their nervous systems, set in generations of fear, terror, PTSD, nervous system reactivity, like having to constantly monitor themselves. Am I going to do something that's going to trigger that one racist, weird-ass white person in the situation who's then going to pretend they're an ally, or they're going to be like, oh my God, what are they doing? Well, did they use the right charcoal briquettes? You just can't allow some people. It's not about the race. I don't care about race at all. I don't see color at all. Blah, blah, blah. The next thing you know, they're running over there. Excuse me, did you know that it's against the rules to blah, blah, blah? And the black people who have had it are just like, could you mind your fucking business and get the fuck away from me? And the person stomps away, calls the police. There are these people, and they're being verbally confrontational, and they're violating a rule, and I tried to inform them, and they acted violently and angry, and now I feel afraid for my personal physical safety. And then the cops show up, and they fucking shoot somebody to death. If you don't understand that that's a reality, shut the fuck up and stay out of the conversation. Micromanagement, which is an extremely watered down term for abusing, attacking, going after someone, projecting shit onto them like my mother did with her absolute conviction that I was going to be. And by the way, like my brothers and sisters, I'm sure, like, well, you did become a musician and you hung out with all those people. She was doing it to me when I was fucking 6 years old. So shut the fuck up. She was obsessed with that idea before I ever smoked pot. And I smoked way less than anyone else did in the family system, drank way less than anybody else in the family system, et cetera, et cetera. Never had a, so shut the fuck up. Stop playing games because you feel uncomfortable with what your parent did. Micromanagement, which is really abuse and a hyper obsessive, sick desire to project negativity and sickness on one victim, becomes micromonitoring. It's what white society has done to black society. It's what Israel has done to the Palestinians. Right? Steal land, be violent, imprison people, torture people, and then when there's a reaction, back off, grant a few concessions, allow some people to work within Israeli society, blah, 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 and be like, what? And yes, I understand the complexity that many parts of the Muslim and Arab worlds, when Israel was established, wanted to wipe Israel off the face of the map. That's on Britain and the U.S. We're the ones who did that because we felt guilty about what we did during the Holocaust. And also because there's an alignment between Christian, religion and Jewish religion, right? The Judeo-Christian, whatever. Whatever. You don't have to agree with any specific example I give, and I'm not a historian, so I might be wrong. I don't give a shit. But I know this shit happens, and it's super obvious when it happens. Micromanagement, severe abuse becomes micromonitoring. Okay. If you're a victim of this, I want you to feel the validity of that and to know that I know you have either felt it or consciously seen it or even tried to describe it and been gaslit by all society, by your family system, by your social system. I know. Black people, I know that you have experienced that and are still experiencing that. It's real. And when people back off by 70%, they're not doing it because they give a fuck about what happened to you and what they did to you. They're doing it because they're creating a space in which they've already set the ring in your nose. They've already inflicted the pain. They've already conditioned your nervous system to acquiesce to them and to accept violence from them and to accept control from them. And now when they back off, they're removing your right to point out the control and the violence. Now you have to go back in history and go, well, historically we were slaves, blah, blah, blah. And then white people are like, yeah, but that was a long time ago. And we've made all these changes and affirmative action. Hey, I know we're morally corrupt and sick, and I know we are full of shit on that. I'm saying that to black people. To victims of this, I know that you're telling the truth. And I know that the weight of that situation is sometimes worse and more difficult than the abuse. Because now all of society just looks at it and goes, I don't know, you do seem kind of reactive. And I get that they had a horrible childhood, and I get that, there were probably some of the, you're not lying about all of it, but there's got to be some perception difference. And, but they've worked really hard. No, they fucking haven't. Because let me tell you what working really hard is. Working really hard is, I did this shit to you, and I see the consequences in your nervous system, and I see you struggling with it, and it's my responsibility. It's on me, and I'm sorry about what I did. I don't want you ever blaming yourself. I don't want you blaming yourself. Hold yourself responsible for your life, but you are not responsible for what I did to your nervous system. B, you see them go to therapy and struggle and bleed and spend 15 fucking years figuring out, why am I like this? Why would I do this to my kid? So that they can come and show tangibly, this energy is no longer in me. Hey, John, my son, you can pick up something in front of me and you won't see my back go rigid and me start to twitch and have to walk out of the room, because that's the only way I can control the fact that I may not allow myself the behavior, but I still allow myself to instinctively at a body energy level see you as an object worthy of attack and worthy of dumping the shitty ass abusive behavior on. That's taking responsibility. Any other version, shut the fuck up and go away. Not interested. That's taking responsibility. Okay, so for you people who have been victims of this, micromanagement, which is really abuse, shifting to micromonitoring, I see you. And if you're trying to describe this to your therapist, if you're trying to describe this to yourself, if you're trying to understand what it is, I want you to understand society's going to gaslight you. Their heads are up their ass. It's convenient for them. They don't want to deal with the complexity of it or how much abuse there really is. They don't want to deal with it. I've talked about this before. Society has not changed. They're not more empathetic. They still blame the victim, or they're willing to allow the victim to be the victim. Sometimes they just don't know what to do. So I'm telling you, victims, I see you, I understand, and this is real. And I'm telling you right now, if there's some part of you that keeps trying to forgive and hold yourself responsible for forgiving, well, they really did back off and they had a terrible childhood, but it feels conflicted and you still have PTSD, blah, blah, blah. A big part of the reason why you still feel conflicted and you're not healing is because you're lying to yourself. They didn't change. They just waited that shit out and allowed the circumstances to change and monitored and managed their behavior just enough that they get away with what the fuck they did without ever admitting that they did it. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. They don't care about what you experienced. They don't care about what you suffered. And they're not going to take responsibility. Their shift of reducing by 70% is literally about nothing but protecting themselves from the perception of society, from their own perception, and also placing you in a situation where suddenly now you're responsible for the fact that you're reactive to them. You're responsible for the fact that you still have a reaction to their micro-monitoring. And yes, you are going to have to go to therapy and figure out how to cut that cord between, right? You're going to have to figure out how to take that ring out of your nose so that they can't use it anymore. But they don't get to point out that responsibility. Take a severe case. To imagine how insane that assertion is from them, that, well, you have to be responsible. Shut the fuck up. Here, let's take a more extreme situation. If I were to kidnap someone and torment them and sexually assault them for a week, and then they struggled for years, a decade with PTSD and nightmares and struggled to be functional and blah, blah, blah. And I came to them and I was like, look, I'm not sexually assaulting you and torturing you now. I've stopped doing that. Like, this isn't all on me. Yes, it fucking is. It is all on you. It is 100% all on you. You launched that shit in that person's nervous system, and now they're having to do all of this work to heal it. You don't get to go, well, I'm not doing it anymore. Well, I've reduced my behaviors. Now I just kind of slap them on the butt here and there. I've reduced. Okay, so I'm using an extreme example to show you how stupid and juvenile this reasoning and logic is from these abusers. Is they will micromanage for a decade and a half, which is just out and out abuse. 2 decades. They'll continue to do it. Then they'll realize, he or she's in therapy. Like, oh my God, They'll still say in their head, you're kind of a mess. It was this. Well, they'll kind of help. Well, we're willing to whatever. But they will micro-monitor you. And now when you're hyper-reactive to their little tiny signals, they're just going to be like, whoa, God, like I wasn't the best parent, but God, they've always been so. They're fucking lying. They're still gaslighting you, and they're still setting up everybody in your environment to pretend that there's something on. There's nothing on you. Nothing. It's not you. It's them. They're full of shit and they're lying, and you don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them anything because they never owned what they did, and they're still not owning. In fact, their reduction by 70% is still gaming you and playing you and actually making you look crazy. Right? If I was hyper reactive to my dad, how judgmental and critical he was, is sometimes even he was just innocently asking a question, trying to show interest, and I would be hyper defensive. And it made me look crazy. Honesty from him would have been, hey, son, I spent 20, 25 years hyper abusing you, criticizing everything you did, telling you didn't know your head from a hole in the ground, calling you an idiot, acting like you were an idiot, leaping on everything you did, judging everything you did, intruding on you. So I totally get, like, I don't blame you at all. It's on me that you have that response. I'm really sorry about what I did, but I really was interested in what you were saying. It wasn't a setup, which, by the way, was a big thing with him. He would ask questions as if innocently, and then slowly ramp into anger and criticism and judgment. Even, right, those were setups. Like, he just couldn't help himself. So that's what an apology is. Owning that what looks like hyperreactivity in this moment is a result of decades of abuse and micromanagement, and that the backing off now leaves you with this hyperreactive response to anything they do. And if they don't go to your brothers and sisters or go in the situation, or if white people aren't going to other white people and going, hey, you might have seen something that legitimately looked hyper reactive from a black person, but we don't get to do that because we spent 300 years abusing, raping, murdering, micromanaging, hyper controlling these people. And if they're not done healing, which has now been forced on them to do, that's on us. That's not on them. I'm not saying accept abuse or hyperreactivity from a black person that you didn't do anything to, but you better fucking understand where it comes from, man. And it's not on them. It's wild how the human race will rape, murder, and enslave, and then 100 years later be like, oh, but we stopped. Jesus Christ. I know it's not the right thing to say, but I'm just like, are you retarded? What the fuck is wrong with you? It's just a mind-numbing level of stupidity. I don't know what to do with it, right? Okay, so victims. What responsibility looks like is, A, let's say they've reduced by 70%. If you're hyperreactive, that person has to own there's a reason why you're hyperreactive and hyperdefensive. And they are the reason. They have to own that. They have to own what they did and go, what I see your nervous system do is on me. I did this. Second, they have to go through the torture and shattering of self and rebuilding of self. Right? I spent 15 years breaking myself and rebuilding myself until I came out with something that was not what they had handed me. That I was able to function and have a life and get married and have kids and have a career. Right? They should be doing that work. White people should be doing that work of shattering ourselves, taking ourselves apart. How did we become the kind of people who could rape, enslave, murder, torture, micromanage, and then lie about it? How did we become those people? How am I a part of this? What do I do with it? It's not to go to black people and go, I'm doing this work. I'm an ally. Shut the fuck up. Go do your goddamn work. Okay? So what it looks like for the victims of this, A, total ownership of the fact that they did it to your nervous system. B, now that they backed off, if you're hyperreactive, total ownership that they created that hyperreactivity and you're not responsible for that. And then them doing that work. Now you think about, let's say I was hyperreactive with my dad or critical or judgmental of him. He received from me half a tiny percent of the relentless, paranoid judgment, accusation, and control that he leveraged over me for the first 15 years of my life. And it's wild that people will be like, well, but you were like, no, shut the fuck up. We have this sickness in the human race where someone will set off a bomb and a person bloodied with traumatic brain injury will pick up one of the bomb fragments and throw it at the person who set off the bomb and will be like, well, oh my God, like, well, you are throwing bomb fragments. I mean, something happened. I believe you that something happened, but this is now and nothing's happening now. And you just threw a bomb fragment back at that person. I need you to understand that that's not how these things work. You are a sick motherfucker. What the fuck is wrong with you? The person who set off the bomb is a person who set off the bomb. Shut the fuck up and go talk to them. Are you scared? Are you scared? Or you just want the victim to have to go talk to them? You want the victim to have to negotiate with the person who set off a bomb on them? Is that what you want? Then go away. Stay out of the conversation. If you don't have the spine to deal with what the human race is when it comes to gaslighting and scapegoating, just admit and just go somewhere else. Live a nice life. Fine. I am not mad at you. Stay the fuck out of the conversation. All right. Victims, I love you. I know what happened to you. I know it. And if your abuser, micromanager has backed off and now it's just micromonitoring and you're hyperreactive to it, I want you to understand they don't care. They don't care. People who care, people who really care and really love you will bleed. They will be the ones to take themselves apart, put themselves back together to attempt to become an energy and a way of relating to you that lets go of the fact that they, in a paranoid, toxic state, needed to scapegoat you and gaslight you. That's what they would do if they cared. They're not going to do it. So understand that, yes, you're being gaslit unintentionally and sometimes intentionally by all of society, by the people in your family system. What you're seeing and feeling is real. There are people who know it. I understand you can't go to society. They're full of shit. People are full of shit. They don't get it. They don't want to get it. It's too uncomfortable. It's too disturbing. You're going to be okay. I want you to know that this is true, and it's a great relief to know that it's true, and to at least internally hold those abusers responsible. Don't get confused. If you feel a righteous anger and rage towards your abuser and they backed off by 70% and now you start feeling guilty, don't feel guilty. They're full of shit. They're gaming you. Okay? So this episode was about micromanagement at a level that's really abuse, medium to severe, becoming micromonitoring, and how hard that is for society to see. And now that you're already kind of a mess because of all of the abuse, society's like, well, you kind of are a mess, blah, blah, blah. But you know that there's something severely wrong with the situation. And that is that person did not change because they give a fuck about you. They change because they care about what society thinks. They change because it games you and it becomes extremely hard for you to hold them responsible. I know it and I see it. I love you. You're going to be okay. Talk to you guys next time.
Just for today, everything's okay. Everything's okay.